Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this panel discussion on technology regulation. It's a great pleasure to be here in sunny Bratislava with you all. My name is Benjamin Muller and I am a senior policy analyst at the Center for Data Innovation, which is a think tank that studies the role of technology policy in advancing innovation and economic growth. The forum's theme this year is building resilience in a divided world. So it's very timely for us to examine the role that digital technology plays in enhancing state capacity and look at the European Union's approach to technology regulation. And to help me do this afternoon, I'm very pleased to be joined by Veronika Remišová, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Investments, Regional Development and Informatization of the Slovak Republic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Marta, Poslad, the Director of European and Transatlantic Public Policy at Google. And shortly joining us on Zoom will be Minister Mykhailo Fedorov, the Vice Prime Minister and Minister for Digitalization of the Ukraine. This is a moderated Q&A panel, so I will be asking our panelists some questions, but I would like to remind you all that whether you're in the hall or online, you're also able to ask questions using the GLOBSEC app, the Slido function, and I will try to get to as many of you as I can. The session will run for 50 minutes, including audience questions. And a reminder for those of you in the audience who'd like to ask questions, please do stand up, speak clearly, and keep your questions brief. Bear in mind also that for Minister Fedorov, he will be working with a translator, so it's especially important to keep questions to him brief to facilitate that. All right, let's get started. Ms. Poslad, I'd like to start with you, if I may. How has the war in Ukraine played out online from the perspective of Google with regards to disinformation, cyber intrusions, and other non-kinetic forms of attack? And what lessons, if any, can you draw from the last 100 days in terms of what an appropriate policy framework looks like to combat online misinformation?
Thank you so much for your question, Ben. Before I get to addressing it, I just wanted to say it feels great to be back at GLOBSEC, and it happens at an extraordinary time after 2 years of the pandemic, but even more so because we are in a country that is neighboring with Ukraine, and it feels more timely than ever to hear experts from Central and Eastern Europe more than ever. I think, like for many other entities, companies, sectors, the war has left a very significant mark. The way we look at it at Google is predominantly 4 buckets. One is, of course, protecting users from disinformation. 2 is making sure that cybersecurity is well taken care of in terms of the usage of our tools and platforms. 3 is, of course, humanitarian aid, and 4 is also still the ability to provide authoritative sources of information, including in Russia. YouTube is the only big tech platform that is still available. It's not operating on the business side, but it is still providing the availability of content that is uncurated and moderated. So whatever you can see today on YouTube is also available to users in Russia. It has been an extremely difficult time for the region. It had definitely influenced our own workforce in the region, but I think everyone has been acting under the assumption that we all have to play a part, be it as individual employees and companies with tools like Google. Many lessons learned, and I'm sure we'll be deep diving into it. I don't know if you want to take a break to say hello to Minister Fedorov now, or should I just continue with the response?
Yeah, please. For the time being.
But I think, given the two previous discussions that took place on this stage and listening to Commissioner Vestager and our Microsoft colleague, I think it's also been a big lesson learned for tech companies, and definitely the question of regulation has been very often coming up. I would say we learned predominantly two things. One, we often need legal basis to act, and there is no debate about regulation or no regulation. It's all about sensible regulation that, especially at the time of war, still allows us to react quickly, to react efficiently, and to really respond to unprecedented events, because this is what the war posed in front all of us.
Thank you very much, Ms. Poslad. And a very warm welcome to you, Minister Fedorov. Thank you very much for joining us today. Greetings and solidarity from Bratislava. I'd like to go straight ahead and ask you a question, if I may. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is conducted in cyberspace as well as on the battlefield. And this showcases the dominance of the cyber domain. In the last 5 years, we've all been warned of Russia's offensive cyber capabilities, and we've seen evidence of it in action. However, the war seems to have been accompanied by a somewhat muted Russian cyber campaign. So I wanted to ask you, did we overestimate Russia's cyber capabilities? Have Ukraine's defensive cyber capabilities simply proved superior? Or is it a case of both?
Да, всім доброго дня, дякую за запрошення.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I would like to start with the fact that we have created the Ministry of Digital Transformation back in 2019, back when President Zelensky was elected into office. And at that time, we have created Ukraine's most popular digital product, which is our DIA app and portal. This is a one-stop shop where you can get all or many of the available state services over the app or over the portal. And since the middle of 2019, we had been constantly creating products under constant, incessant cyber attacks from the Russians. And I'm talking about daily, unabated cyber attacks. But even still, over 17.5 million users, even today, are still using our DIA app. This is one of our most successful digital projects in the country. So the cyber war has been raging all the time. And in January and in February, we have had significant escalations. And all over that time, we tried to create value and just defend ourselves. And we never stooped to counterattacking. But when Russian tanks started rolling, when the Russian military started killing our people, we started to respond in kind in the cyber front. And throughout that time, we have been able to conduct a lot of quite successful cyber operations. We have counterattacked both the Russian informational infrastructure and some key resources. And to that end, we have accumulated a large community, including companies and individuals and specialists. Answering your question, first of all, on the one hand, we have been able to create quite a resilient cyber defense system throughout these years, which was qualitatively different from what there has been before. We have, as a matter of principle, we said that business has more competence, the private sector has more competence in creating a competent cyber defense system. And this is what we did. We got them on board and we built it together. Secondly, ever since we started developing our DIA app, we have had an ethical hacking and bug bounty program ongoing, which means ethical hackers are authorized and encouraged to find vulnerabilities in our app, and we we pay them for finding those vulnerabilities. We follow in line with the Pentagon's and the leading tech companies' example in this regard. And this is what we do with our products. So when the war started, there were some very powerful cyber attacks, but we were ready for that in terms of cyber. We have had some best practices, solutions, and algorithms to follow. And second of all, we started counterattacking. And all of our tech potential that you have come to know has been used to counterattack. And I must say that we have had a number of quite successful case studies, including the case study of RuTube, which is a Russian clone of YouTube, something that we've been able to put down for several days, several banks and other critical infrastructure services. So it's a real cyber war raging out there, and we are defending very successfully. So answering your question, on the one hand, we have been able to defend ourselves successfully, and on the other hand, we've been able to counterattack because we have brought together a team of over 300,000 IT specialists to that end. So I think it's very important to pay attention to cybersecurity. It's crucial to create a robust cyber defense system. It's very important to bring the public sector on board. It's very important to do bug bounties. It's very important to do digital education. It's very important to invest in cyber defense. It's crucially important to follow the world's best practices. And what we've been doing in the last 1.5 years is something that has brought us to this result. But this is something that we are continuing to do today. But even despite the war, here's an interesting fact, even despite the war, we're still launching digital services which millions of Ukrainians use. So during the war, we continue launching services. For example, we launched a survey on the DIA app where our users were answering questions regarding right to bear arms, with 2 million answers recording to date. So we are defending, we're counterattacking, and we are still launching new services. And we're also developing new approaches and breaking ground in digital democracy, for example. I think we are getting a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and this is something we will be we'll be happy to share with other partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Fedorov, for this enlightening and detailed answer, really focusing on the theme of how to build resilience in a changed world. And there's clearly lots to learn for all kinds of actors, whether government or private sector. Minister Remišová, I'd like to turn to you. The European Union is a democratic space, and building resilience in a democracy also involves protecting the information space. That has to be balanced with the fundamental right to freedom of speech. What, in your view, is the right balance to strike between protecting freedom of speech, but also protecting a healthy online information space?
Thank you. First of all, my warm welcome to Mykhailo. We met a few days in Davos, and Mykhailo there presented how the digital world can fight the oppression and can fight the aggression, Russian aggression, with powerful tool that the Ukrainians used in order to fight also Russian propaganda. And I think it was a great example of digital resistance. So congratulations, Mykhailo, for all your work that you've done during this terrible aggression. As far as your question is concerned, well, I think we should not ask whether regulating global tech is realistic or not. I think that at this point, we don't have a choice anymore. We have to go for regulation. My colleague from Google said that we need meaningful regulation. Yes, we need effective, meaningful regulation also for global tech company in order they have a legal base to act. The platforms, we saw during the years that the platforms like Facebook would not regulate themselves, and sometimes we lack a meaningful engagement with authorities on taking more responsibility with harmful content. So the European Union and the national government need to take more stringent measures. The Slovak authorities, for example, we have consistently reached out to social media, to Facebook, with our concerns. So there has been willingness to work in good faith on mitigating issues such as spread of pro-Kremlin propaganda. Slovak Republic especially is vulnerable to Russian propaganda. We are one of maybe in top 3 states where Russian propaganda is very, very active. So the aim is towards a good regulation which does not leave out input of these companies and finds a good balance on fundamental notions such as freedom of expression. In the first days of war, in order to fight Russian propaganda in Slovak Republic, we adopted an amendment of Cybersecurity Act. So some Russian propaganda websites were shut down. Especially we had a case when contributor to one website was a Russian spy. He's now prosecuted, and which is a flagrant example of Russian interest in Russian enemy interest in Slovak Republic. And in Slovakia, we saw a corrosive effect on our society, on democratic processes, on democratic values that are measured and also documented by GLOBSEC. So, of course, regulating GLOBSEC companies, it's not an easy task. It's not an easy task to design. So one has to create obligation that would be effective while balancing the right of users, especially freedom of speech. And from this perspective, at the EU level, the first, the attempt to regulate the platforms was the introduction of code of practice. So this was a soft measures that all global tech companies declared they will adhere to, but in some cases it proved insufficient. So therefore, now the European Union introduced the DSA, so Digital Service Act, and also some member states introduced national regulation, like, for example, Germany. In Slovakia, we also preparing act to regulate platforms in order to, especially to fight against hate speech, against propaganda, against harmful and illegal content. And war in Ukraine and Russian aggression showed us that this is really the last minute, this is the right time to do it.
Thank you for that, Minister. I have an interesting question that's come up on Slido that sort of riffs on this theme and sort of spins it around slightly, and I'd like to pose it to Ms. Poslad. So we've just heard from Minister Remišová how there are situations when sort of voluntary practices are insufficient, and in order to create sort of a consistent, harmonized framework of rules, legal regulation is necessary. The question that I would like to ask revolves, or that was asked on Slido, that I'm going to sort of improvise on, is clearly one advantage that the bloc of liberal states has is that, unlike authoritarian states, we have a vibrant, flourishing and innovative private sector. And that is also a source of leverage when it comes to conflict. How, based also on what Minister Fedorov said, how do you think governments can better use the assistance of corporations to secure their digital security?
Thank you for this question, I assume coming from the audience here. so first of all, again, looking back into what has been happening in the past 3 months, there have been excellent examples of how companies like ours were working, including with Minister Fedorov here. So very often this starts with just using tools that are already available. An example of that would be our advanced protection program, where today over 180 entities in Ukraine are using this highest standard of protections that are news organizations, government agencies, and other high-risk users. And I could go on with many examples of how we're sharing knowledge about threats that we see on our platforms. We also very often go back to governments and try to connect the dots about things that we don't see and we don't understand as a tech company. But to get to the bottom of your question, that I feel would require a more structural response, this is definitely about building platforms where private entities that share the values of homelands they're coming from could be definitely working on more structured ways to oppose those who do not share these values. And I think, again, we've been talking about values in the internet ecosystem for years, but for the first time we are so vividly confronted with it. And for example, there is the new EU-US Trade and Technology Council that for now predominantly brings in governments together. There is a small industry component. I would see that as an ideal forum that could be bringing together also the private ecosystem, sharing the same values. Because when you look at the scale of how the internet is used, governments are there to guide, governments are there to provide legal basis, but we are here also to bring in responses at scale. And I hope I can speak on the behalf of the whole industry. Many of us have been ready to do that. I'm not going to be very modest, but I'm going to say again, thank you to Minister Fedorov for awarding Google last week with the Peace Prize in Davos for what we managed to achieve together. It's of course a deep in the ocean, but we're looking forward to identifying even more ways to work together today at the time of war, but also for the benefit of rebuilding Ukraine.
Thank you for that a useful reminder that when it comes to building resilience, big tech is an ally and not always the bogeyman it's sometimes made out to be in the world of policy nerds like myself. Minister Fedorov, I have another question for you, please. Ukraine's technology sector is clearly a major economic asset and a source of pride for the country. And it also shows just how strategically significant this sector is. It gives you tools to stand up to a much larger power in an armed conflict of the kind we haven't seen in Europe for many, many decades. What is Ukraine's view of how to balance the need for rules in the technology sector with the importance of technological innovation and the strong tech sector?
Я хотів би спершу почати з того, щоб подякувати.
I would like to start with thanking Veronika for what she's doing for Ukraine. She was the first minister who reached out to me when the war erupted, offering help, and we have had some very productive cooperation. And she has received a peace prize from our people, just like Google. And I would say not so many companies and ministers were honored with this reward. So I wanted to thank Google, and I wanted to thank the minister, because Google also was one of the first to be awarded because please accept our heartfelt gratitude on behalf of our entire people. A very important point was raised here, that we are sharing values with the private sector. For example, one of the values is that personal data, personally identifiable information, does not belong to the state or to the platforms that they put them on. The data belongs to the people, and people need to understand that the data are well taken care of, well protected, and we as a state do everything we can in this regard. We also collaborate with Google extensively in terms of digital literacy, e-governance, and our joint programs and driven by our common values help us a lot to foster this cooperation. Answering your question, I think it's going to be quite a difficult road to victory and a no less difficult path towards renewing and rebuilding our country. But we believe in the digital economy. And because, for example, the Russian Gazprom is worth 100 billion and Tesla is worth 800 billion. And this is just one example how one tech company is worth more than most Russian companies taken together, because the future is with tech. The future is with talents, with bright ideas, and with great management. So it is our goal for companies like Google, for example, to open their offices in Ukraine, to invest in Ukraine. So our goal is to create some of the world's most favorable conditions for technology companies to feel right at home in Ukraine. We're doing a lot to that end. For example, we have launched one of the most favorable tax and regulatory regimes in Europe for tech companies. We have lowered taxes for tech companies. We are introducing elements of English law into practice in Ukraine. We are now building an IP law court. We are separately working on improving other elements of venture investment and venture capital in Ukraine. We believe there is no other road for us other than fostering conditions for tech business to grow in Ukraine. And just like the war has shown us, all of the most influential tech companies and tech platforms that bear the most influence with our citizens and citizens of the world have supported Ukraine by divesting from Russia and adapting their policies on fighting disinformation, on how to discern the content which is telling the truth from propaganda, and thus they have become our great friends. So I think it is our mission as regulators to create a sound and reasonable policy and regulation for companies like Google, like Meta, like others, to continue operating in Ukraine and to divest from Russia and to come to Ukraine and create tech jobs here. For example, we are also effecting reforms in tech educations because by improving our STEM instruction, because the better engineers we have, the more Google will want to hire in Ukraine. The better the tech system, the larger they would want to have their office here. The more predictable the legal system and the more rule of law, the more investors will be inclined to invest in Ukraine. So we are ready to compete equally for talents, for a more secure environment. And we will strive to be as flexible as we reasonably can to compete with our European partners, because we will want to renew our country as much as possible. We would want to be more free, more attractive for tech companies and tech capital. Thus, this is the path we have envisioned, and we're doing everything to that end.
Thank you, Minister. I have a question for Minister Remišová, and then I would like to go to the audience to see if there's any questions there. Minister Remišová, I suppose the elephant in the room when it comes to technology policy is the United States, which is by far the largest technology sector in the global economy. Now, the United States and the European Union are close allies. Could you offer us some insights as to what technology policy measures should be coordinated between the European Union and the United States?
So far, the European Union has taken a lead in regulating the online information space. In the European Union, also in consumer protection area or in online world, the consumer is on the first place. So I'm very happy that the EU started back in 2018 with a code of practice on disinformation, that with European Democracy Action Plan, then on Digital Service Act, on which political agreement has been reached only recently. And it's important that the clients, that consumer, the data users are safe in the online world. As far as the United States are concerned, their approach is more, I would say, more freedom than regulation. But I think that we have seen the terrible effects of disinformation or campaigns on. We saw it in the U.S. election campaign, Brexit, then in Ukrainian war, when the deregulation is not when the regulation is not in place. The impact on the democracy is very corrosive. So, as a European, I think that I would say that the United States should approach the European golden standard, and in terms of regulation, it's the European Union which is setting the golden standard also in online sphere. But here I would say that regulation will not solve all the problems that we have. First of all, we need digital literacy, digital education. So here also it would be very important at the European level to develop the common curricula on digital skills, to measure digital skills in the member states, to develop digital curricula for media literacy in the member states, and also at the national level to develop strategic communication vis-a-vis disinformation scene. For example, in Slovakia, what we are doing, we launch a huge national project in developing digital skills in vulnerable groups, like senior citizens. We developed curricula from the very beginning to the advanced group in collaboration with the university. Part of the education of elderly citizens will be also the security, because there is a huge number of online theft, phishing, and so on, and also prevention for disinformation. We did a poll against elderly citizens. It's like 2/3 of senior citizens never encountered the term of disinformation or hoax. So they are not used to distinguish between what is correct information, what is misinformation or disinformation. So digital literacy, strategic communication at the national level, and then the regulation. And the regulation should be effective, should be sound, and should not counter the innovation, development of innovation.
Thank you, Minister. Are there any questions by audience members? Please.
Hi all. Algorithmic Russification. I'm Ukrainian sitting in Bratislava with English language interface on my smartphone. I type Bratislava, and what I get, I type Bratislava in Cyrillic script. First, Wikipedia, Russian Wikipedia. Second and third, tripadvisor.ru. How come? I don't have Russian language in either of my devices. I have only indicated that I know English, I know Ukrainian and other languages, and still I have the first. Anyone can get to me and see the first result in Russian from Russian Wikipedia. How come? What can we do about it? How can I stop seeing the suggestion from the Russian sites here? Thank you.
So that's an interesting technical question. I'd like to supplement that, and I think it's well directed at Marta. You might not give the precise technical answer, but also someone online asks, working as a disinformation analyst, I see pro-Kremlin platforms which were blocked rising up as new domains. This is a very fluid domain. It's very inscrutable to the non-tech wizards. How does Google cope with the complexity and the very many domains that you have to consider if you want to sanitize this space and protect it against outside interference?
So on complexity, we're not hiding the fact that it has certainly grew in the past 3 months, but then again, I think we were pretty quick at getting ourselves organized around it, and I would say to complexity, again, sensible and workable innovation that allows us to act is the best point of reference. So if you're going to look at how we handled some of the closures of sites that were Russia-sponsored or officially or unofficially, until we got to sanctions, we had to be very creative on what basis should be funded. Majority of those websites do not have a big banner saying we are communicating this on the behalf of the Russian state. So, that was an instance where the lack of legal basis or legal decisions was an obstacle. So we found a way how to work with governments and EU institutions on how to improve that. System. Then when it comes to recognizing or making decisions on content moderation, this is an ongoing exercise. And yes, the first few weeks when the problem was very complex might have been a time where we were making mistakes and still learning. And we are in a completely different place today when certain channels of communications are open, when we're organizing roundtables that are not one-off events, but are actually an information and knowledge exchange, and that should continue. We have all the language capabilities that are needed to be useful throughout this war. So I'm confident that we are in the right place today to handle that complexity. When it comes to the particular question on your phone, I have to say I don't know what's in your settings, but I would certainly start with that. It's really hard for me to address this particular. But you're definitely nobody's targeted. Nobody's targeting anyone with this type of content with a bad intention. Then, however, if we think about availability of Wikipedia in Russia and availability of platforms like YouTube, we think that this is actually good news. So I would say you having access to it is an unintended consequence of it, but including everyone from the US government and EU institutions, I think everyone agrees that it's critical that some channels of access to information are still
very quickly
open.
Sorry to cut you off. I hear that Minister Fedorov will have to leave us soon. I just want to give everyone in the room an opportunity to thank him for participating and wishing you all the best. Thank you for coming today and offering your very salient and timely insights with us straight from the front line. Thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you, Mykhailo, and good luck in everything.
Дякую вам.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. We still have a couple of minutes left. Any further audience questions in the room that I can take? Otherwise, we also have further questions on Slido. Please, sir.
Thank you, sir. Juraj Čorba, the Ministry of Investment and Informatization. I have a question for Google, if I may. It seems that the online platforms, including yours, tend to emphasize that you need a proper legal basis to be able to take down a particular specific item of content that is deemed either illegal or possibly harmful. Now, the cases, as has been already mentioned and explained in the previous question, then the content tends to run away to some other source that can be found later on a different site or on a different place. So, given this, isn't it rather the case that instead of focusing on legal basis for taking down of individual items, we rather need to have a closer look at the underlying software infrastructures that online platforms are using when they amplify the spread of the content, when they target individual users that are being targeted by your algorithms, your systems that you design and that you promote. Isn't it rather the better way how to actually be effective?
I think it's certainly one of the ways to look into how information is amplified. But when you look, for example, at the run-up to Digital Services Act, those aspects have been considered. And actually, so-called big platforms today are well positioned when it comes to demoting content and not bumping up content that would be deemed controversial or harmful. Indeed, like you say, the problem are very often smaller platforms that are then again not always captured by the legislation that is being prepared by the European Union. And that's again a question of every coin has two sides. So on the one hand, there is an appetite to only regulate the big ones so that the small ones could still develop and grow. Then again, when we are regulated and we are the only ones bound to do things, exactly like you say, users go to smaller platforms that do not need to meet the certain threshold and are not embraced by regulation. And this is getting very problematic with the youth, for example, that tends to escape from mainstream popular platforms to places where they can stay away from the parental control, for example, and same applies to free expression aspects, for example, or actually being unable to respond to disinformation challenges. One of the while we're very supportive of Digital Services Act, we've been in that position from very early on. We're again worried about some unintended consequences, given that it is a possibility that in the outcome of DSA, we will need to notify creators about demoting their content, why we did that, and they will be able to appeal. Imagine that this would be the case at the time of the war in Ukraine, when we would be taking down strongly disinforming media about the war in Ukraine, and we would need to let the bad actors know about the fact that we took them down, why we did that, and we would need to give them an opportunity to appeal. So again, a very well-intentioned regulation that had in mind bloggers from Slovakia whose content could go down. But then again, there is the second side of the coin. So again, back to your original question, definitely we should be looking into how the technology is constructed. And maybe I'm going to say something that will sound disappointing, but it's unfortunately very hard to find bad consequences of technology development with technology as such, and this turns out to be impossible because we see constant bypassing, coming up with new solutions. One platform is regulated, there will be another one. So at the end of the day, it all goes down to digital skills, and part of the hygiene of how we live in the 21st century and what kind of skills we should have to differentiate and how to understand the algorithmic work, how to distinguish propaganda from authoritative sources, because if we're going to meet in this room in a year from now, we can talk about different platforms, same problems, but if we're not going to develop media literacy and those skills, this problem will never go 100% away.
Thank you very much. And with that, we've come to the end of this truly fascinating session. Some extremely interesting and insightful contributions from all the panelists. Clearly, the running thread is how to structure the appropriate coordination between the private sector and the government in free societies. There are no final answers. This is a live and ongoing conversation to be had, but I hope that it was thought-provoking and insightful for you today. Please thank the panel. Join me in thanking the panel, and after that, it's time for a short coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you very much.